Before a man can be strong, he has to stop pretending that strength is something he has to earn. And before he can lead, he has to remember what it means to follow what's true. And before he can actually protect, he has to learn what it feels like to feel unguarded. Before he can rise, he has to remember that he was never really beneath to begin with. I think we've spent this entire month remembering what the world, in essence, has trained us to forget, and that is that our worth is not proven, it's remembered. That you can't earn what you already are. And that somewhere between survival and performance, we forgot how to just simply be. This is the final stop in this month's journey. But it's not an ending by any means. It's considered like a bridge, the quiet crossing between who we've been once and who we're becoming. At Uber Bintegers, we believe that manhood without integrity is just performance. And intimacy without honesty is just a fantasy. We don't argue with boys, we want to awaken men. Because real men don't hide behind pride, they rise through presence. Worth was never the finish line. It's the starting ground for every other kind of healing, I believe. It's the soil that integrity grows in. And it's like the foundation that intimacy is built on. And when we forget our worth, everything that grows from that soil, in essence, starts to rot. Our relationships, our direction, our identity, even our idea of what masculinity means. Because you can't build healthy strength from self-hate. And you can't build leadership from insecurity. You can't protect what you secretly believe doesn't deserve protection. And that's where most of us start, not from confidence, but from confusion. Not from courage, but from comparison. We inherit these scripts that tell us that real men don't cry, they don't falter, they don't need. And we're told to dominate what we fear instead of feeling it. And we learn that being in control is far safer than ever being connected. But that's not strength, that's performance. And that's what happens when men are taught to act powerful instead of to be powerful. See, if worth was the lesson of this month, then manhood is a practice that we want to get into next month in our series. Because the moment that you remember your value, you in essence have to decide what you're going to do with it. Worth tells you who you are. And then manhood asks, now that you know, how are you going to live with this? When we spent October rediscovering our value, we were in essence tilling the ground. And then now in our series coming up in November, we're being invited into something of what to plant in this ground. We've mistaken hardness for strength and domination for direction. But the truth is, hardness is just really a mask for fear. And domination is like a disguise for disconnection. And you can see it everywhere, I think, online, in culture, in our conversations we have. A generation of men, in essence, who were told that their power was in how much control that they had. A generation who learned to hide behind the confidence instead of cultivating character. And so we were taught to be protectors of others without ever really being taught how to protect our own inner lives. And I think this is killing us, not just emotionally, but spiritually and relationally and generationally. So, because the thing is, when a man forgets his worth, he doesn't just hurt himself. He starts measuring everyone else's worth through that same broken lens that he's peering through. And that's how you get, I think, the world that we currently have now, where loudness is confused for leadership and where love is mistaken for leverage. And you can't really talk about masculinity without actually talking about healing. And I mean, you can't talk about healing unless you're going to invest in talking about your worth. Because until a man learns to sit with his pain without blaming it on others, he'll never really learn to lead with presence. Until he can actually name his wounds without shame, he'll keep projecting them as power. And until he learns that intimacy is not weakness, he'll keep mistaking isolation for independence. This is the cost of manhood in a culture that's addicted to validation. We lose touch with our own reflection. We start chasing admiration instead of alignment. And we settle for applause instead of authenticity. And somewhere along the way, we've called this success. But integrity doesn't clap. It calls you back. It whispers, who are you when no one's watching? It asks, does your inner world match your outer world? And intimacy, the thing that we were never taught to value, answers softly saying, show them the man who feels. Show them the man who stays. Show them the man who doesn't use silence as a shield. Because that's where strength actually lives. Not in performance, but in presence. Not in conquering, but in connection. Not in trying to control life, but being congruent with it instead. We've arrived, I think, at a moment where the definition of manhood has to be rewritten. And not through rebellion, but through remembrance. Not through proving your worth, but through protecting what we've remembered, in essence. So, you've done the hard work this month, right, of reclaiming your worth. Now we want to take that same truth and give it a body, integrity. We want to give it like a heartbeat as well, which is like intimacy. We want to give it like a mission as well, like masculinity that heals instead of harms. So that's what November will be devoted to. The return of real men. Not perfect men, but men who are present. So if worth, excuse me, if worth was remembering who you are, then manhood is now remembering how to walk like that. It's not about dominance. It's about direction. It's not as much, it's not even about being feared, but about being felt. Not being obeyed, but learning to be open. Real men don't have to prove that they're in control. They have to prove that they're in touch with their emotions, in touch with their purpose, in touch with their truth, in touch with the moments that matter, the moments where he kept running from himself and now finds that he is the safest place in the room. When we enter into the new series, we're going to take back the word simp, a word that the world uses to mock softness, and we redefine it as strength in mastered presence, as an acronym. Because when you know your worth, you stop needing to posture. When you know your value, you stop trying to convince others of it. And when you lead with presence, you stop performing masculinity. And now you start embodying it instead. The world does not need louder men. It needs congruent men. It needs men whose tone matches their truth. Men who are gentle without apology, yet firm without fear. Men who can actually protect without control and love without losing themselves. That's not weakness. I would say that's restoration. That's the courage to feel again. So, in this moment, as this series is coming to a close, I want you to take a breath and look at what you've done, the pain you've met, the lies you've been unlearning, the truths that you're reclaiming. You didn't just remember your worth, you remembered your humanity. And that's That's the doorway to everything else you'll ever become, I believe. You can't outgrow what you haven't first owned, right? And you can't lead others to safety if you haven't first led yourself home. So this is that. This is that sense of homecoming, the one where your worth becomes wisdom and where your reflection becomes responsibility and where your healing turns into your heritage, your legacy. Because a man who knows his worth becomes a man that the world can trust. He doesn't use people to fill in his emptiness. He fills the world with integrity. He doesn't compete with other men. He calls them to higher standards. He doesn't fear softness. He respects it. And he doesn't run from intimacy. He's in essence rebuilt himself to be ready for it. And that's where manhood begins. Not in armor, but in awareness. Not in ego, but in empathy. Not in hierarchy, but in his humanity. So as we're closing this chapter, I want you to remember this. You're not moving on. You're moving with. You're moving with your truth. You're moving with your softness. You're moving with your strength that doesn't need an audience to be real. And when we meet again in next month's series, we'll be stepping into the kind of manhood that the world has forgotten was possible. One that heals instead of hides. One that builds instead of breaking down. One that protects not through power, but through presence. Because the return of real men starts here, where worth stopped being a question and started now being the answer. I'm so glad you followed along. I'll see you in the next series. Drop me a comment down below. How did this series hit you? What were your epiphanies? I would love to hear. See you soon.